When I first agreed to go to that house, I was sure it was an ordinary weekend out of town. Friends, silence, nature. We all wanted to take a break from the endless everyday life, the city noise and the eternal rush of work. Eric said he had found the perfect place, and we agreed almost without hesitation. Deep in the forest, far from civilization, with all the amenities. It sounded like a dream. We arrived late in the evening. I remember standing at the trunk, taking out my bag, and looking at the house. It was large, two-storied, with wide windows. It looked well maintained, but somehow reminded me of the scenery from horror movies. An old barn stood a little to one side, and behind it a dense forest began. Surprisingly, even with such a dark blue sky, there was almost nothing to be seen. We went inside. The house turned out to be even better than expected. A spacious living room, fireplace, kitchen equipped with all modern appliances. However, something about this house immediately made me tense up. It was silence. Not that cozy, soothing silence, but a dull one, as if absorbing all sounds. Eric turned on the music, Jason immediately poured everyone a glass, and Lily started unpacking the food. We laughed and talked, and I almost forgot about that strange feeling. Almost. It all started the next day. I woke up early, before dawn, from some strange sound. It wasn't the rustle of the wind or the animals. Something metallic, scratching. I opened my eyes and froze. At first I thought the sound was coming from the hallway, but then I realized that he was closer. Much closer. It came from behind the wall, right by my bed. I lay still, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. The sound rose and fell for several minutes. Then suddenly he disappeared. When morning came, I told the others about it. Eric waved it off, saying it could have been mice. Lily assumed that the house was old and the walls could make such sounds. Only Jason looked at me seriously. "Doesn't that seem strange to you?" he asked. I didn't say anything. Meanwhile, Lily discovered strange scratches on the wooden floor in the hallway on the first floor. They stretched from the front door to the kitchen. Eric waved it off again, saying it could have been the claws of some dog that lived here. But I couldn't get a picture in my head. The whole next day passed quietly. We walked, ate, and played board games. It was only when night fell that I felt the same strange silence again. Lily fell asleep first. Eric and Jason went outside to sit by the fire, and I stayed in the house. I was sitting in the living room, looking out the window at the blackening forest, and felt my whole body tense up. The sound is back, but it was louder now. There was a metallic scratching, as if someone had run a knife through an old pipe. I stood up slowly, trying not to breathe too loudly. The scratching was getting closer. It came from the direction of the stairs leading to the second floor. I walked up to the stairs and froze. There was no light upstairs, and all I could see was the dark opening of the corridor. And then I saw them. There were bare footprints on the stairs, stained with mud. They led down to me. My head felt like it was bursting. We closed the door at night. We were all in the house. I ran outside, shouting to Eric and Jason that someone was in the house. They jumped up, and the three of us rushed inside. We searched every corner, every room, but we didn't find anyone. Just Lily, still asleep, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, she said she had a dream about someone standing in the doorway of her room and looking at her. That was enough to make us pack up and leave. But something went wrong. When we got to the cars, the doors were ajar. Eric's trunk was broken into and his belongings were thrown out. Someone left an inscription on the back window. "You shouldn't have come." We dropped everything and left in the same car without even looking back. We left without saying a word. Eric's car was speeding along an empty road lit only by the headlights. Lily was sitting next to me, hugging herself, and Jason and I were in the back seat, tensely silent. Eric stared ahead as if in a trance, occasionally gripping the steering wheel tighter. We had driven about 20 kilometers when something loomed ahead on the road. The headlights picked out a strange figure from the darkness. We all sucked in a breath at once. It was a black silhouette, clearly human, but motionless, like a mannequin standing right in the middle of the track. "Is it one of the locals?" Jason managed to say. "Maybe you need help. Don't slow down," I blurted out, feeling everything shrink inside. Eric, without slowing down, turned the steering wheel, circling the figure. We flew past, and I caught a glimpse that it really was a man. He did not move, his face was turned to the ground, and his arms hung limply at his side. "To hell with this place," Eric muttered. "We thought the worst was over, but that was just the beginning." A few kilometers later, Eric suddenly braked, almost flying off the highway. "What are you doing?" yelled Jason. Eric silently pointed ahead. The same figure was standing on the road, illuminated by the headlights again. "This can't be," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe this is some kind of prank?" Jason tried to joke, but his voice also betrayed nervousness. "Like the locals are making fun of tourists." "This is not a joke," I managed, looking at the strange figure. Eric drove around her again. We drove on, but the tension in the car was unbearable. Several hours have passed. It was already getting light when we saw the gas station. Eric stopped to fill up the car, and Lily, Jason, and I went inside to get coffee. There wasn't a soul at the gas station. The operator's desk was empty, and it looked like the staff had just left in the middle of a shift. Jason laughed nervously, joking that it looked like a horror movie, but none of us answered. Lily found a coffee machine, but it wasn't working. We went around the room hoping to find at least someone, but nothing. Everything except this emptiness indicated that the place had just been left. That's when I noticed the doors leading to the back room. "Hey, is there someone there?" I asked. Jason walked over to the door and slowly opened it. There was an office inside. An old sofa, a closet with papers, a ceiling fan. But there was a handwritten note on the table. I took it and read it aloud. "If you're reading this, leave now. They're watching. They know." I froze, feeling a chill run down my spine. Who knows?" asked Jason, looking around. But at that moment, I heard a loud banging outside. We ran back to the car. Eric was standing there trying to fill up the tank, but his hand froze when he saw us running up. "What happened?" he asked, noticing our faces. I wanted to answer, but then I saw her. The same figure. She was standing at the edge of the gas station, motionless, but closer now. "Get in the car," I shouted. We jumped in, and Eric took off. We returned to the city a few hours later, exhausted, tired, and silent. We swore to each other not to mention this incident anymore. But here's the strangest thing. The next day, while looking through the phone, I found that the camera had taken several photos. I don't remember filming anything, but there was a forest on them. The same forest where we went for the weekend. And there was a figure in the last photo. I never went to those places again. We broke up with friends after losing touch. But sometimes, when I hear something strange at night, I think about those photos and wonder, what if they still know? The thought of the photos that appeared on my phone haunted me. I decided to remove them, but every time I reached my hands, a feeling of anxiety bound my fingers. Was it just a game of my mind or a warning? A few weeks later, when everything seemed to be forgotten, I received a message from Jason. We haven't talked since we got back, so his "you have to see this" took him by surprise. The message was accompanied by a video. There was a night landscape on the recording. The camera was shaking, as if the person filming it couldn't stand still. The forest, illuminated only by the dim light of the moon, seemed unreal. But that wasn't the scariest part. A familiar silhouette appeared at the end of the frame. That's the one. The black figure stood motionless, as it had then. But now I realized that this video was not shot by someone random. It was Jason. His voice was whispering in the background. "You should have stayed." I immediately called him, but no one answered. Voicemail. I tried to calm down, convincing myself that this was just another prank. But the next morning I got a text message again. This time from Lily. "Jason is missing. Have you talked to him?" I felt something shrink inside. Has Jason disappeared? It didn't look funny anymore. I called Lily. Her voice trembled as she explained that he had not been in touch for several days. She wanted to know if he had tried to contact me. He sent me a video. "Lily, it's weird. It's from the forest." "What video?" I explained to her, and she was silent for a long time before answering. "We have to discuss this. Come to me." I arrived at Lily's house in the evening. She looked broken. "Jason never showed up," she said. "We were sitting at the table trying to figure out what to do. Eric was supposed to join in, but he wasn't answering his phone." I showed Lily that video. She watched carefully until she saw the end. Her face paled. "It's from the forest," she said. "I'm sure. But we all left. How did he get there?" "I don't know. But that's not all." I opened my phone and started looking for photos to show her, but they disappeared. "Are you kidding?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I swear they were here." Lily shook her head nervously. "Something is wrong. This place, or what we did." Her words hung in the air, and then my phone rang. Eric's name appeared on the screen. "Eric, where have you been?" "I saw him," he whispered. "Who?" "Jason. He was at my house." Lily and I exchanged glances. "Eric, what do you mean?" His voice grew louder, almost shouting. His face. "It's not him. Damn, he just stood there and watched. I have to leave." The call ended. Lily began to tremble. What does it all mean? I didn't know the answer. All we could do was wait, hoping it was all just a bad joke. But the next night was the climax. There was a knock on my door. It was Jason. I froze. His face was strange, as if it was stretched like a mask. He looked straight into my eyes without blinking. "Why did you close the door?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. Animal fear gripped my whole body. "Jason, is that you?" His smile was unnatural, too wide. I closed the door, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. But then the knocking started. And it didn't stop. The knocking did not stop. It was getting louder, sharper, as if someone was hitting the door with all their weight. My body was paralyzed, but my brain was screaming desperately, "Run!" Trying not to make any noise, I backed away, holding the phone in my hands. My fingers were shaking as I dialed Lily. "Beeps." She answered right away. "I have him, Lily, at my door. This is Jason. But he's not him." "What?" Lily panicked. Suddenly everything went quiet. Complete silence. Not a single blow. I held my breath. "Are you still there?" Lily whispered. "Yes." And then I heard footsteps in my house. They sounded muffled, as if someone was barefoot, moving slowly but confidently. "He's inside," I whispered. "Call the police." But before I could do anything, my phone flew out of my hands. Someone's cold fingers grabbed my wrist. I turned around, and Jason was standing in front of me. His face was so close that I could feel his breath. "You should have come back," he said in a low, strange voice that was unnatural, as if the words had been squeezed out. I broke free without thinking and ran into the bedroom. He locked the door and pressed his back against it, trying to keep it from opening. Footsteps sounded right outside the door. Then Jason's voice sounded again. "Why are you locking yourself in?" We're friends." I was silent, afraid that any sound could provoke something terrible. At that moment, the phone rang. It was a desktop machine that I hadn't used for a long time. Someone on the other end of the line was leaving a message. "Eric is dead. You're next." We should have stayed there. The voice was shaking with static, but I recognized it. It was my own voice. The door began to shake, as if it had been violently beaten. I understood. I don't have time. I broke out the bedroom window and jumped out into the street. Pain shot through my legs, but I ran away without turning around. My car was parked at the curb. I jumped in and started the engine, not bothering to close the door. I saw Jason in the rearview mirror. He just stood in the middle of the road, looking into my eyes. But then he did something I'll never forget. He started smiling. That smile grew wider and wider until it seemed limitless. I have traveled far, but even now it seems to me that he is watching. Every time I look around in a crowded crowd, every night when I pass by a mirror, it seems to me that I see it. The police found Eric's body 2 days later. The cause of death was never determined, but his face was horrified. Lily is no longer answering her phone, and every time I fall asleep, I hear a familiar voice whispering, "You should have stayed." It had been a few weeks since that night, but there was no feeling that it was all over. I moved to a new house, changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts. But something continued to haunt me, not physically, but like a shadow that stays behind you wherever you go. I tried to get back to normal, went to work, and avoided talking about Jason, Eric, and that night. All that's left is an endless feeling of anxiety. One night I was sitting in my new apartment, trying to fall asleep. The TV was on to drown out the silence, but the sound was annoying, so I turned it off. The room became too quiet. I even heard the clock on the wall ticking steadily as it counted down the time. Suddenly, there was a loud bang in the apartment. I jumped out of bed. It was like the sound of an object falling. I went into the kitchen, looking around. There was a glass on the floor, smashed to pieces. But I knew I hadn't put him in a position where he could fall. I picked up the pieces, but then I heard a new sound. The steps. They were heard outside the apartment door. My heart started pounding as I slowly walked to the door and looked through the peephole. No one. But I felt that someone was standing there. I opened the door with a knife in my hand, but there was only an empty landing in front of me. I took a step forward, looking around, and immediately the door slammed shut behind me. I rushed back, pulled the handle, but the door was locked. Footsteps were heard inside the apartment. I gasped, trying to remember if I'd brought the keys with me. But at that moment, the footsteps stopped. I listened again. Complete silence. Then I saw someone looking at me from the window of the apartment opposite. Figure. She just stood there, motionless, and looked at me. I felt my legs start to shake. The phone was left inside the apartment. The only way to call for help is to knock on the neighbors' doors. But no one opened it. I went back to my door and pounded on it with my fists. "Hey, if someone is inside, I will call the police." There was no response. Suddenly, the footsteps started to sound inside again, but this time they were heading for the door. I froze. Silence. And then the voice. Quiet. Familiar. "Did you think that was it? We will never finish." I recognized him. It was Jason's voice. Something from inside began to scratch at the door like claws. Slowly, methodically. Without waiting for the door to open, I rushed down the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. I ran out into the street, completely confused and distraught. It seemed to me that someone was following me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. I ran down the empty street, lit only by the dim light of the lanterns. One thought was spinning in my head. Where to now? And then I saw a car parked at the curb. The driver was inside. I ran up to her, banging on the window. "Please, help me. Someone is trying to kill me." The driver turned his head. It was Jason. His face stretched into a familiar crazy smile, and he slowly rolled down the window. "We're friends, right?" At that moment, I realized that this was the end. I froze in my tracks. Jason was looking at me. His eyes were blank, but there was this creepy smile on his face. Time seemed to have stopped, and the only thing I could hear was my own heart pounding. "Get in," he said, his voice calm, almost casual, as if he was just offering an old friend a ride. I didn't move. Panic seized me. Run away. Screaming for help again? But the street was empty. "Are you afraid of me?" Jason continued, tilting his head slightly. "We've only just started. Do you remember how much fun it is?" I took a step back, then another, but my legs felt like lead. Jason smiled again, then turned around and pointed to the back seat of his car. There was something lying there. I squinted, trying to see. It was Eric. His body was twisted, as if it had been broken in several places. His eyes were open and he was looking straight at me, but there was no life in them. I threw up right on the asphalt. Jason snorted. "You're a weakling, but we've only just started," he said, then turned to the steering wheel, closed the window and started the engine. I turned around and ran, but the car followed me. The wheels rolled slowly on the asphalt, making a creaking sound that seemed to eat into my ears. "Come on, run. This is just a warm-up," Jason shouted through the slightly open window. I turned into an alley, but the sound of the engine followed me. Wherever I ran, he was there. I found myself at a dead end, looked back and saw that the car had stopped a few meters away from me. Jason got out of the car, slowly, as if he had nowhere to hurry. He had a hammer in his hand. "Do you know what the funniest thing is?" "What is it?" he asked, approaching. "You thought it was all an accident, but I've always been there for you. Always. And you helped me make it interesting." I screamed, but the sound of my voice was drowned out by the blank walls of the alley. He raised the hammer, and at that moment I noticed another figure coming out of the shadows. It was the girl from the store, the one who was a witness that night. She was looking at me. Her face was calm, but her hands were holding something, a small camera. "Smile," she said. I heard a click. The camera took a picture, and then darkness. The hammer came down on my head over and over again, until consciousness left me. When I opened my eyes, everything was blurry. My ears were ringing, and I realized that I was lying on some kind of cold metal table. The lamplight was blinding, and it took me a while to realize where I was. My body wouldn't listen. His arms and legs were strapped. Jason and that girl were standing in front of me. They were smiling. "You're going to be a star," he said, lifting the camera and pointing it at me. The girl clicked the button and the recording began. "Welcome to the show," Jason said. "Here we make a real hell out of people's lives, and you will become our main actor." I screamed, but the gag they put in my mouth muffled the sound. The last thing I heard before everything went out was their laughter and the sound of the camera filming every second of my horror. They didn't kill me right away. They made a whole performance out of my pain and fear, posting videos for people who were looking for something really scary.